This is Athletes as Educators with former pro basketball player, championship winning coach, and author Angela R. Lewis. Angie Lewis interviews current and former athletes who are passionate about sharing the lessons they've learned and the experiences that have shaped their lives. A resource for parents, a guide for student athletes, a source for current and former athletes, keys to transition off the court. Welcome to the Athletes as Educators podcast with Angela R. Lewis.
Welcome to this episode of Athletes as Educators. I'm your host, Angie Lewis. On the podcast today, we have Leslie Bottrell. She played basketball in Canada. Back then, she was Leslie Goosens. After college, Leslie went to Australia and New Zealand, works with the Sydney Olympics, and is now a doctor in China, in Shanghai, but she's moving to New York really soon. Leslie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Angie. Thank you for having me.
Leslie, will you talk a little bit about when you started playing ball and why?
Sure. I think from a very young age, my parents had both been, coaches at the school. They were teachers at my school and stuff. And actually, even before I started playing, I was the team mascot when I was in kindergarten. My dad was coaching the girls' basketball team, and he'd arrange trips for us all to go to, watch the Detroit Pistons play. And so I think basketball was introduced at a very early age. And we just were kind of really encouraged to participate in sport from both parents, mom and dad, both, starting from things like t-ball and volleyball, and then basketball really stuck with me and my siblings. That was sort of our sport.
When did you know that this was something you wanted to put your heart into? And basketball, something that you loved. It sounds like it was really a part of you, but at some point you made that choice.
Yeah, I'd probably say kind of senior elementary school, grade 7, 8. We had a coach that was really dedicated and would take it to a lot of traveling tournaments, and kind of introduced it as, a kind of not just a sport you played for a couple months of the year, something you could kind of do year round if you were serious, and you could play club teams and stuff like that. So I think having a coach that really was really passionate about that particular game, kind of, introduced that to me. And that, then from on to there, going into high school, I went to high school where basketball was sort of the sport to play, and we had a lot of success, both the girls and the boys. So we supported each other, and I think I was lucky. It was kind of put on an equal footing. Girls were just as sort of popular and supported and successful as the boys team.
That is so rare in high school sports, where the girls team and the guys team get the same type of support and recognition. It's great that your high school was like that.
Yeah, I think it was unique for the time. I think it probably helped. It was a small Catholic school, St. Joseph's in St. Thomas, Ontario, in a smaller town too. But it was and I think at the time we just didn't give it a thought. And then I think when I went on to university, where it kind of shifted, where there was a kind of disparity between the men's support and the women's support as far as, supporters to the games and stuff like that. Then I realized how lucky we were at the time.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting. Speaking of some of the differences with women and men's sports, you mentioned that you tore your ACL when you were pretty common amongst female athletes.
Yeah, there's a lot to, for the anatomy side. And as I learned, I did that injury, and it was pretty devastating at the time. I was, a teen, in my last year of high school. And then from then on, and then obviously studying medicine, I learned more about the injury. Common in women, a bit has to do with the anatomy and the kind of composition of the joint being, women's joints are by nature a bit more flexible from a evolutionary point, just with And not to get into the science of it, but and then the anatomy of it as well, just like the, kind of the hip angle and stuff like that, so that and the types of sports we traditionally play as well, where you're kind of it's a perfect storm for those types of injuries.
Are there some things that young female athletes could do to kind of prevent those type of injuries, ACLs and knee injuries?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, and I mean, I learned this after the injury, which was, would have been helpful before it happened, but certainly just, really getting, just really strengthening the muscles around the knee so that it's not taking the full force. So you could do, you could do all of that and still injure it, but you certainly could limit the chances if you do proper stretching, proper warm ups and cool downs, and certainly that kind of getting into the gym and doing weights and really strengthening the surrounding muscles, your quadriceps, your hamstrings, and really that sort of thing. And obviously learning proper technique. I mean, sometimes it can just be a fluke, but just watching how you're doing your cuts and stuff like that. So that comes from, you want to have a really good strengthening coach and things like that to help with that. But, you could do all of that and still have the unfortunate occasion, just, the timing and where you place your foot and stuff. But if you can do those things, I would recommend that, because I'm paying the price for it now.
What do you
for that injury?
You say you're
I just coincidentally had an appointment with an orthopedic surgeon the other day, and I've just, it's because of that injury, I then damaged meniscus and I damaged the cartilage. So I'm kind of really suffering with arthritis now in that knee. So I'm just sort of now looking at my options to get it to a bit more pain-free. So getting cortisone shots and stuff. I'm kind of like the limping aged athlete, but
ouch, yes, that sounds painful. There's so many athletes who go through that.
Yeah.
Competing early on. I'm sorry, you can go ahead.
No, that's fine. You go ahead.
I was just going to say, competing early on, there's so many benefits, many ways that it helps athletes. We talk about the potential difficulties of sustaining injuries when you're younger.
Yeah. And I think for mine, I was unfortunate in that the original surgery I had failed. So they replaced the ligament, and apparently it had failed early on and it wasn't recognized. I was sort of, the people that were treating, the physio or whatever, was sort of saying, oh, it's in your head, just go get back out there, do it. But I really felt it was unstable. Mm-hmm. And so I, unfortunately, by the time I kind of went back and said, no, this really isn't right, mm-hmm. It had done a lot of damage. And then, so I had to have it redone, and then I had to have a few surgeries down the track. So I think and certainly that was, 20 years ago. So they've come a long way in how they repair and stuff. So I think, the success rate and that long-term sort of damage doesn't quite, it certainly doesn't have to happen for people. And, I look back on it, and I think in medicine, we weigh up risk and benefit. And the risk, if I knew 20 years ago that I'd be in the situation I am now, I would do it all again. The benefits of participating in sport have far outweighed any kind of physical pain at the moment. So, yeah. So,
your love of sport runs deep. I that after college, you went to Australia, you went to New Zealand, and then made your way to Australia for the Olympics. What were you thinking? How did this come about?
Yeah, so with my cousin and another friend, the three of us girls, we decided we want to go travel after finishing university, and we decided on those destinations, and basically doing the year abroad kind of backpacking thing. we had some pretty crazy adventures in New Zealand. We bought a 78 Corolla and drove it around the country. And then we knew the timing because it was 2000. We knew when we got over to Sydney that it would be like kind of lining up with the Sydney Olympic Games at the time. And we just sought out, through a recruitment agency, sought out jobs. We thought we want to be a part of it. Having always, watched the Olympics growing up, and it's just such an exciting event. And so we got really lucky. We got some great jobs for both the Olympics and which was more and the Paralympics, which, at the end of it, I thought was even far more inspiring to be a part of. It was just a really fun, exciting time pulling together with a lot of people working towards pulling off this event. And it was a huge success.
Okay, Leslie, we have to go back. You just walked up to them and said, "Hey, I want to work with the Olympics. Tell me what I can do." How did that work? Like, what did you end up doing?
Yeah, well, honestly, so there's the organizing committee for the Olympics. Whatever the host city is has one. And they're usually made up of people that have worked at other games. So there's like the kind of games junkies that are event managers, and that's their kind of career, and they follow the games, and they kind of use the same model and tweak it, but it's all usually so they don't reinvent the wheel. They use that model. And so we showed up 3 months before the games were starting. So they just happened to be, we went to this a recruitment agency. We were lucky. The girl that was in charge of assigning the jobs was Canadian, so she kind of pushed us to the front of the line and got us some decent jobs. So a little bit of luck, so with that. But yeah, certainly, I mean, and with the Olympics too, for people, there's always volunteer opportunities. And if you just go and sign up, we had people coming in from different countries, not just from Australia, that were volunteers, although the majority were, but we were lucky we got paying jobs as backpackers. We needed that. But I mean, just there's always opportunities. So if it's always been kind of a dream to get involved with it, it's so worth it just to you just can go online. I mean, back then we were looking in newspapers and found it. So
that's pretty amazing.
And we didn't really have any sort of qualification because we worked in a role called accreditation, so the passes and stuff. So it wasn't sort of requiring any sort of previous experience.
Right. They trained you on what you needed to know, and you were right in.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was, yeah.
Now, you mentioned that the Paralympics were even more inspiring. What from that really stand out?
Yeah, I think the way that the Paralympics were, the athletes were a lot more accessible for us as employees. We were kind of interacting with them, we would, have our lunch in the same canteen and stuff with them, whereas in the Olympics it was sort of the athletes were all separate and stuff. So with them we actually developed real friendships and helping getting the venue ready and stuff like that with them, and actively involved in, and just hearing their stories, how they became sort of paralytic or quadriplegic, some severe injuries that they sustained. And there was one guy in particular, one of the guys that won the gold medal for Australia, who had been a miner, and he'd been this water tub exploded and shot him back and shattered his back, and he was severely depressed, and the thing that kept him going was his love of I worked at the sailing venue, and he fought through, and he won the gold medal. And it was just such an amazing story. It was just you don't know. I think with these guys, you can kind of feel sad and stuff yourself when you sustain an injury in sport. And then I met these people like, wow, they've really had to overcome that's true adversity, and not only, survived it, they thrived, they became, gold, they became medalists, or, even just to participate in the Paralympics. So,
It
and I think I hadn't been exposed to it as much because I don't, it doesn't get the same television coverage and stuff that the Olympics gets. And I thought that's a real shame, because this is a really large opportunity um, for particularly young people to see and to be inspired.
definitely, and it helps put things in perspective, life into perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think I learned that even more so now, like when, working in hospital and stuff like that, and I had worked on a spinal unit for a time and stuff, and you just like, you got to just be thankful for what you're given, and then if you are given a really tough hand, you play well, just um and you see that it can be done. They set such great examples. So
Did you always want to go into medicine? You mentioned working on a spinal unit at one time. When you were in college, did you know that you always wanted to go into medicine and become a doctor? Or how did that come out?
yeah, well, my undergraduate degree was in human kinetics, like kinesiology, movement science, and it was, about very much about physiology and human movement and injury and things like that. So, I kind of, and then, having had my injury and being involved with, medical doctors and with, particularly with physios, I actually initially thought I wanted to do physiotherapy because I'm a really great physiotherapist in my hometown that helped me a lot. And he'd been through the same injury, so he's really, could empathize. So I think some sort of, healthcare and helping people was always the in the back of my mind, but I think it took me some time to get there, because after a 4-year degree, I certainly wasn't ready to go straight back into 4 years of medicine. It seemed a bit too daunting. So I think taking the time, I did college, so I actually qualified as a high school teacher before I went traveling. I think for me, it was always there. It just sort of, I wasn't sort of racing to get there. It kind of happened a bit more gradually.
Will you say again a little bit about how you selected which field of medicine you decided to go into?
Well, that was sort of, I've kind of had a unique experience in that. Um, so I ended up studying, because I'd been to Australia and I'd met my husband there. I decided to apply and study for medicine in Australia. And so there they have a bit of a different setup than the States, in that you graduate from your 4 years and then you do a general internship and residency. So you do a couple of years where you're just sort of rotating through all the specialties and just getting a real feel for what you'd like to do. Some critics say, well, that's just a waste. If you know what you want, you should be able to go just straight to do it. But I think it is good. It makes for, well-rounded doctors. So I had a couple years of just general going through, and I loved it. I loved a lot of stuff. I did particularly like and sought out residency terms in orthopedics, because I thought that's what I wanted to do. But then afterwards I thought, nah, I probably don't. And then I did a lot of time in emergency, and I was kind of thinking emergency or anesthesiology. And then I was working in emergency, and then we had the opportunity to, well, one, I had my 2 sons, so I had two boys within 18 months, so I did maternity leave and I had some time to reflect. And then my husband got a job opportunity in Shanghai when I was sort of in the middle of that. So then when we landed in Shanghai, I kind of had come here and decided to, well, general medicine or general practice, family medicine was probably more useful and more sort of a viable option here in Shanghai. And then it took a little twist, and I was working more in sports medicine, doing, medical support for sporting events in high schools and some professional events as well. So, and that's sort of what's evolved, and that's kind of what my passion is now. And certainly moving to the US, it's something that's a real thing I can pursue there. So I do like the family medicine side, but I think my, love of sports and and that kind of being involved with that is a real passion of mine. So
Will you?
watch this.
No, it's pretty amazing. Medicine in different parts of the world. And I didn't say thank you, but thank you so much for being willing. You're 13 hours ahead of me right now. So it's already tomorrow where you are, which is
I'm coming from the future.
you are definitely in the future. Will you talk about some of the differences and similarities between medicine? We're talking Australia to China to the US. I mean, there has to be some differences.
Yeah, well, I work for an international clinic in Shanghai. So, and it's actually owned and was started by an American woman. So we very much follow an American model of delivery, which was new to me because I'd always worked in Australia. So in Australia, it's I worked in as a trainee, you work in a public hospital, and like in Canada, it's socialized medicine, so free medicine, free for all. So which has been sort of not taken up in the US, so hopefully soon. But so I think that I've had different experience working in a public system in Australia is very different. You practice in a bit of a different way. In the private system, it's both a sort of the business side of it as well, which as doctors we try to avoid that side of it and just deliver medical care, but you can get some external pressures, which has been interesting. I think in China I've had the unique opportunity to be able to study acupuncture and kind of integrate traditional Chinese medicine, both philosophy and diagnosis, and then also that treatment with that sort of with needles and with cupping and with different modalities there. And I've really liked integrating that because I think there's a real focus on preventative care and looking after your body before it is sick. And I think Western medicine, we are focused on that, and certainly in family medicine, general practice, that is our main focus. But it's kind of a relatively new concept for us, but they've been doing it for thousands of years in China. So I think that's been sort of the three ways that it's very different in the three countries I've practiced.
It sounds like you have to be very adaptable and flexible when you're when you're in different countries and when you have to learn new ways of doing the work, your industry. Will you talk about how you use what you've learned from playing sports in your day-to-day life and in your profession?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly overcoming, injury and adversity and having to fight back and get back to a level, it certainly that discipline came into play, and knowing when you lose a game or you lose a competition, that frustration and stuff, but dealing with it maturely and with good, as a good sport, and that whole thing, and then obviously winning with grace, and being conscious that when there's a winner there's also a loser, so being gracious in your victory as well. Obviously working with a team and that friendship, you develop really deep friendships and as you're well aware in your experiences, that last a lifetime, and coaches that listening to them and doing what they say, and even if you don't always agree with them, in the end it works out. In business you have a boss, so it all translates, and I think that's makes athletes very good commodities in the business world, and certainly in medicine and in other professions. So I think it's certainly an advantage if you've played on teams or at least been participated in sport. in your future life. So I would encourage it for sure.
Absolutely. Or when you're playing, we know, especially basketball, there's so much conflict and change, and you have to be quick to read and react. How do you deal with conflict now?
Yeah, I think becoming, like, as you get older, you kind of, I think you become less self-focused,
Hmm.
and you learn to kind of see where the other person's coming from. And even if you don't always agree with them, you can kind of understand their perception and use that to try to get to a place where you both can kind of come to an agreement or a compromise, if that's the case. Or if you really want to stick to what you feel is right, at least you can do so sensitively and understand where the person's coming from. So I think it's more of a maturity thing where you kind of become less, ego focused and more on your kind of surrounding world. And I think the more you understand where the other person's coming from, again, if you don't agree, you can resolve conflict. And I think what's happening in the world today, I think there's more of that needs to happen. I think, like, particularly things like politicians and stuff, I think it's hard for them not to be very self-focused. And I think if they became less so, they could probably resolve a lot more conflict.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Just having that willingness to listen and hear someone
Yeah.
and minimally try to consider their viewpoint. If we did that
Mm.
more often, we would have a much different world. You're absolutely right.
And it doesn't mean you have to compromise your own values. I mean, you don't have to agree with the person to still be able to see where they're coming from. So I think people are afraid that if they even listen to one word that the other person's saying, then that's going to mean they've compromised themselves. And I think that's a real problem with today. So,
It is.
yeah.
I really believe that oftentimes people only, to your point, only want to hear things that reinforce what they already believe to be true.
Mm.
And if someone has something to say that doesn't coincide with what I believe to be true, then people don't want to listen, and that's damaging.
Mm. And it just makes that much smaller. If you don't open yourself up to other ideas, then you're only hurting yourself. You're only limiting your own possibilities. So
You're right. One thing you and I were talking about prior to hitting record is that the world is the opportunity for young women. And the world, or for anyone for that matter, but particularly for our purposes in trying to help young female athletes transition, like, the world is their opportunity. What's your advice for young women who have just graduated from college? I mean, this is July when we're doing this recording, so there's a lot of women who are still trying to figure it out a month or two after graduation. What's your advice for them?
I think be open to opportunities. If you have one area that you definitely want to do, like, by all means pursue it. Like, it's never too late to pursue something that you really want to do. Like, you can, at any age, you can do it. And I think, and then even if you don't have it all figured out what you want to do, just do something and it'll come along. And if you've committed to one thing, it'll open other doors and other opportunities for you. People make, what did they say, on average, 3 major career changes in their lifetime. And I believe it's even more, and certainly I've made more. So you don't have to have it all figured out. I remember that, being in high school and trying to decide, what am I going to study, and I had a few options and they were all very different. And at the end of the day, it was like, I was terrified I was going to make the wrong decision. Well, it's not going to be a wrong decision. It's, you get an education. That's great. You get out, you get some work experiences, you get, make yourself available and be, and don't be afraid to pursue what you really want to do. I think for women particularly, we kind of feel like we have to wait until we're fully qualified and wait until we're almost overqualified for a role, whereas men kind of don't. They kind of just sort of give it a shot, like, and I think for women, we kind of want to get it all right before we pursue it, and maybe that's not right, but that's how I kind of feel. So I think we miss opportunities to kind of advance and get into the roles we want, because that's a bit of self-doubt there. And I think you just gotta go for it and learn along the way in some cases, and they say that fake it until you make it.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that comes into play too. So
Yep.
I think we need to kind of be a bit more confident in ourselves that we can achieve it, even if we don't have it just yet. If we're not there just yet, we don't have to be overqualified for a job to be able to do it.
You're absolutely right. And sometimes you just learn as you go, and that's part of life, is figuring it out along.
Yeah. And creating the opportunity, like making yourself available to things, and I think seeking out a mentor and really seeking out people that have the experience in that particular field, and asking for their advice, and you'd be surprised. People, do like to give advice, and they probably like to share what their experiences with you, and just be willing to kind of put your neck out and ask for what you want.
So Leslie, this is crazy. You are really in the future, because I was just about to ask that was really eerie. Ask you, who were some of your mentors and how have they helped you along the way? And then you mentioned mentors. So that's crazy.
Yeah. I'm on the mentor kick lately. We've been doing just last week we do these mentor walks Asia, where we women in different fields meet up in a park or meet up somewhere, and they have mentors, and then mentees follow. Like, you get 3 or 4 women, and you just go for a walk in a park for an hour, and you just share your experiences, and the mentors get as much out of it as the mentees. But so that's why I kind of have that on the brain. But so that's been a really good initiative here that we've been doing, and but for myself, mentors along the way, I mean, obviously you start out, definitely my parents were huge, just providing me with the opportunities to get involved in things like sport and other interests. Certainly coaches, had some really good coaches, particularly university basketball coaches. And then, working in hospitals, some really great attendings, doctors that I've worked with both in Australia and China, and friends as well, I guess, just supports and watching them, the different fields they've gone into and stuff like that. So, I mean, I think there's potential for anyone to really be a mentor or a supervisor or a supporter and stuff like that. So to name just like 1 or 2 would probably be a disservice to the many that I've certainly benefited from knowing and learning from.
You make such a great point, because mentors in our lives at different times in our lives and have different functions for us. And we can learn so much from anyone that enters our life. If there are young women who want to learn more from you, who want to hear about your experiences, how can they reach you?
Oh, yeah, they can probably easiest reaching me by email,
Okay.
or Facebook as well. So, although in China, Facebook is blocked in China, so while I'm still here, that's a bit tough. But probably email. I can leave you my email.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So email is best. Perfect. And so I just want to thank you so much for being on the podcast and letting me interview you, and for you getting up early in the future to talk to me.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
This is Athletes as Educators.
Thank you for listening to the Athletes as Educators podcast. Connect with me through the Athletes as Educators Facebook page or at Athletes Educate on Instagram. Be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode, And go over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. For more resources and information about today's podcast, you can check us out at AngelaRLewis.com.